Yeah, 10-4.
I wasn't thinking.
See, we've done the pledge already, yeah, we did. So we won't do it again.
That's right.
We don't have to do it again.
Is it on your agenda?
No. You okay?
Oh, yeah.
Oops. Who are we missing? We're missing somebody.
We gotta get into Wi-Fi.
Okay. We're missing our city attorney.
Yeah, we're Claudia, though.
Yeah, we're missing. Yeah, we can go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and call to order this special meeting of the Vallejo City Council. Welcome. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Sampayan.
Here.
Vice Mayor Meisner.
Here.
Council members Ducosta.
Here.
Melgapo.
Here.
McConnell.
Here.
Sunga. Verder Aliga.
Okie dokie. Madam Clerk, would you go ahead and announce the action calendar, please?
This item is adult use marijuana business in Vallejo. The recommendation is provide direction on the topic of adult use marijuana business in Vallejo.
Okay, and our presenters. Wow, we got all kinds of presenters this evening. Welcome, ladies.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Joanna Altman, Assistant to the City Manager. To my right, Donna Mooney, Chief Assistant City Attorney. And to her right, Asha Hamid, Planning Manager. On December 12th, the City Council directed staff to return as soon as feasible with a study session on adult use or recreational marijuana within Vallejo. As a brief background, medical marijuana dispensaries in compliance with Chapter 7.100 had been operating with limited immunity from prosecution of illegal land use, later modified to a permit to operate. As an atypical approach to zoning, these medical dispensaries, though in possession of a permit to operate, are not an allowed land use in the zoning code. Without land use regulations, MMDs have not had to comply with site conditions such as parking and other constraints. Recent amendments to the municipal code created a dual permitting approach for medical marijuana cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution, establishing a legal land use for these operations that only the existing medical marijuana dispensaries could apply for. Tonight, staff seeks direction whether the City Council wishes to allow adult use business in Vallejo, and if so, what use types, where, who, and whether there would be any specific operating standards. There are several unknown impacts. Federally, marijuana is illegal. As we recall, the Cole Memorandum, which essentially instructed that in the wake of the enactment of several state laws authorizing marijuana activity, marijuana operations, regardless of the scale, would not be a high priority for federal prosecution if the state has effective enforcement, was recently rescinded in the session memorandum released, the impacts of which have yet to be seen. The sessions memo dates back to the 80s with the basis that the principles of prosecutorial discretion. Revenues. During fiscal year 2016-17, the city collected $2.5 million in Measure C tax revenues, which is the marijuana excise tax from the 11 medical marijuana dispensaries. With the recent implementation of the state law, which regulates medicinal and adult use marijuana businesses, and increased interest by other neighboring jurisdictions to allow these types of uses, it is difficult to predict the potential fiscal impact of adding adult use business or just maintaining medicinal marijuana. The medical marijuana dispensary owners recently met with staff in the ad hoc subcommittee and shared that they are experiencing a 30 to 50% decline in foot traffic during the month of January since the state recently released their temporary regulations. Additionally, staff is not certain to what extent the new medical marijuana uses will increase revenues, being cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution. It is anticipated that revenue would increase beyond the adopted projection of $2.4 million if the City Council allows adult use retail sales. Another unknown is the initiative approved by the City Council during the month of December to add to the November ballot, which would allow more operations anywhere in the city. During a recent meeting with M&D incumbent operators, they shared concerns about market saturation in Vallejo. And finally, with the initiative, staff recently did file a lawsuit to find the initiative illegal. From an enforcement perspective, there are many unknowns, beginning with the inability to test for driving under the influence. Unlike a breathalyzer or specimen sample, it is difficult to test the THC levels since it remains in the system so much longer than alcohol, as an example. DUI is a concern, particularly with the increase in pedestrian versus vehicle accidents this year alone that the police department and fire department have shared with the city council and the community. As a tragic reminder, a 66-year-old Sassoon resident struck 6 people on the 3700 block of Sonoma Boulevard in 2015, killing 1 woman, critically injuring 2 women, injuring 2 children who had head injuries, and a gentleman waiting for the bus. Toxicology tests and the driver's account of his activities confirm that he consumed marijuana just before driving. Another unknown impact is that on youth. An article released in the Oregonian newspaper cites a study that was revealed that nearly 20% of state-licensed marijuana retailers sold marijuana to underage shoppers in a series of undercover visits by regulators. The Oregon Liquor Control Commission sent people younger than 21 into 86 licensed stores across the state in December, just this past December. Of those, 16 allowed underage people to purchase marijuana. The necessity for enforcement is a reality. With existing constraints of ongoing enforcement of illegal operations and active compliance of existing operators. If the City Council allows adult use sales of marijuana in Vallejo, there are several high-level policy considerations, including business types and regulations. An attachment to the staff report was included for the City Council to consider. Of note, retail, which also refers to dispensing as it's been in Vallejo, delivery to an end user or patient, which is different than distribution, being more of a business to business, and cultivation and manufacturing, which are medicinal uses in the zoning code approved by the City Council in December. If the City Council desires to allow any of these business types, the following high-level questions are who, where, and are these additional operations operating conditions such as no on-site consumption or limiting the types of products sold, as an example, no soda or candy. Makrasa looks to the city who has local control in the arena, therefore the City Council can apply more conservative regulations. Upon direction, staff would work with the ad hoc subcommittee on marijuana to develop code amendments that follow the general direction of the City Council received tonight. It is possible to bring forward temporary regulations by amending Chapter 7.100 in April, or by April, but in order to amend the zoning code and specific plans, creating use types, permit conditions, similar to the emergency ordinances that the City Council adopted in December, it would take several months and the final adoption would likely be in July. Staff posted an online form on Open City Hall to garner feedback from the community and included that in the staff report. As mentioned previously, the ad hoc subcommittee and staff met with the medical marijuana dispensary operators last week to receive feedback and hear concerns about the city's ban on adult use marijuana. If the City Council directs staff to proceed with developing actions to allow adult use marijuana businesses in Vallejo, staff recommends the City Council proceed with caution and include public feedback opportunities, most importantly related to the location of retail sales. Staff has received feedback over the last couple years related to medicinal sales and the amount of pedestrian and vehicle traffic impacts on adjacent neighboring residential neighborhoods. Site conditions that allowed use types are required to follow have not applied to medicinal dispensaries, as I stated earlier, due to the limited immunity status. So neighborhood impacts have varied drastically, with one residential neighborhood in particular being heavily influenced and very vocal. With recent implementation of state law, we can point to case studies in the city of Berkeley as an example, who has experienced increased traffic so much that one dispensary had to expand to accommodate both retail and adult use. Finally, as I shared on the previous slides, the expectation and amount of enforcement is also a very important component for consideration. As a visual, this map, and you have a larger map in front of you as well, identifies the general plan designations with a designating the locations of the existing medical marijuana dispensaries with the cross. Medical marijuana cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution uses are approved in the industrial, limited industrial, and planned development industrial zones, which are complementary to the business limited residential, business light industrial, and industrial areas in the interim zoning policy designated here in the pink, light purple, and dark purple. And that concludes our presentation. We are available to respond to any questions.
Thank you. And before I entertain comments, questions from council, I have 13 speaker cards. I would like you to be cognizant of the time, please. You have 3 minutes. There are a series of lights at the podium. Green means go. Yellow means start to wrap it up. The red and the buzzer means stop. So please stop after your 3 minutes. I know that there's both sides of the street represented here in this audience this evening. I would ask that you show respect for the speakers, irrespective of whether they share your opinion or against your opinion, and allow them to finish without booing, hissing, or otherwise. I'm going to start with Jason Kisheneff, followed by Kevin Bowl, followed by Feather Thomas, Jordan McPherson, and Ryan Messina. So if you'd line up in that order, please, I'd appreciate it.
Hello, I'm Jason Kisheneff, American Canyon resident, Green Party congressional candidate. I favor ending the failed war on drugs and ending marijuana prohibition. But that aside, what we're talking about here is money. It's not so hard to predict the effects of letting a lot more people buy. Tax revenue will go drastically up. That's not hard to predict. We're also talking about crime. In order to seriously argue that crime will be worsened by legalizing recreational use, you first have to assume that marijuana is not readily available now, which is the same about the effects about our youth. You have to assume that they can't get it now. Does anybody here seriously believe that marijuana is not readily available now? That's ridiculous. As far as traffic concerns, driving under the influence is still just as illegal. Whether it is alcohol, Ambien, marijuana, or whatever, that doesn't change. I've seen some studies that show that the effects of marijuana on your driving are actually less than the effect of having a child in the back seat. There's really no real reason here to vote against legalizing recreational use. The wills of the voters have spoken. I think this council is already aware of its reputation it's gathered around the Orson Cement Factory, and you might want to be careful crossing the voters. Jason Kisheneff, Green Party congressional candidate. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin Bowl, followed by Feather Thomas.
I live at 1615 Sutter, and what I'm talking about is a dispensary, 539 Tennessee.
Mr. Bowl, could you pull the microphone a little closer to it, please?
Sorry.
Yeah, just raise it. There you go.
So since the dispensary has moved in, the owner has been quite lawless, has illegally placed a dumpster in the alley by a no parking sign, and has restricted flow of traffic. As a result of his dumpster, he's been throwing his used marijuana plants in there, and as such, I have had 8 death threats, 1 threat to firebomb my house, and 5 death threats to kill my dogs. I have been fighting with the city for 1.5 years to get this dumpster situation resolved. It is totally unsatisfactory. I have no quality of life. Planning Division did absolutely nothing, even getting letters from code enforcement and the police department. The other thing that I'm not happy with is he did this inflatable device on the roof, which sent my dogs over the top, which he would not take down for a week, which meant I had to stay home with my dogs, windows closed, music on, because it was freaking him out, and he had the audacity to have one of his employees move it so it was less than 15 feet from my backyard to send the dogs over the top. The other thing that was really interesting is the fact that yesterday, his employees parked in spots where he assured us they would not park, and this afternoon, his security guard decided to go behind the restaurant and urinate in the alley before he started his job. If there's going to be the dispensary selling both, I suggest there's a separate place, a standalone building, and a parking lot that will hold 25 cars, because our neighborhood will not tolerate the traffic. I've had my driveway blocked. I've had to call the police, which we've had no responses on. I've had my car hit with a baseball bat because I had an altercation about the guy who was blocking my driveway. And I'm just saying, something needs to change, because my life right now is a living hell because of this dispensary. Thank you.
Thank you. Feather Thomas.
Thank you, Council, for allowing medicinal cannabis into the city of Vallejo. It has made a great difference in many people's lives. When considering adult use, we're for it. We're turning away somewhere between 10 to 15 peoples a day, or patients, or adult use, potential customers. We're sending them across the city to Richmond and Berkeley and other areas that we would like to keep in town. One thing we must understand is cannabis is easily available in Vallejo. Since Prop 215 has changed, a lot of the cultivators were actually counting on our legality to stay in business. And with us turning those people away to the new regulations, we're
Excuse me just a moment. Gentlemen, could you please keep your voices down the back or step outside and close the door, please? Madam Clerk, would you give Feather another 20 seconds, please?
Well, we're actually turning away cannabis that we used to be able to accept, and it's showing up in our backyards and our neighborhoods. There are a lot of people that are actually trying to, stay in the black market, and not only does it affect, the legalities of our business, but the ability to stay open. One thing we're noticing is the other cities that are having a 400 to 500% increase in business sales came directly from the sales figures of the local dispensaries. When we're on average of 30 to 50% down, it's definitely something to take a look at. It's not only about money. I understand the quality of life is a concern, but that's why we don't want to see more dispensaries and outlets opening up. The state has allowed us to operate in the same building, and in some of us, we've had locations where there hasn't been any complaints. So with that said, I'd like to thank all of you for your time and consideration of the growth of our industry, and we must understand that the industry is changing, and we need to change with the industry to be viable. Cities like Benicia, Martinez, Rio Vista, Napa, now American Canyon, Dixon are all considering to open up, which is putting Vallejo on an island when 75% of our traffic is from out of town. It's definitely something to consider, providing that service to everybody with non-consumption on site. Thank you.
Thank you. Jordan McPherson, followed by Ryan Messina.
Hello, thank you, City Council, for calling this meeting and bringing everyone together. I want to first start off by saying not accepting recreational patients is really hurting the shop I work at. Just earlier this week, there was a discussion on, my future at the company, just because they can't afford it. And I'm not mad at the owners, I'm not mad at the managers or anything. I see it every day. We're literally turning down anywhere from 20 to 30 people, and that's not even with the people that call. And it's just hard explaining why every other city around us is opening up and not Vallejo. So, with that being said, I just, I would like to see a change, but I just really appreciate you guys for doing what you have done. Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan Messina. Following Ryan Messina will be Leo Kavanaugh, Joel Garcia, Seneca Messina, Rick Rick, I'm not going to go after your name again. And Anthony from HTP Group. Go ahead, Mr. Messina.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, and citizens of Vallejo. Part of the remarks, a lot that has been said is basically a lot of other people are doing it. Why aren't we doing it? That's a logical fallacy. It's called the appeal to popular. We do not do things because everybody else is doing them. The other thing that we hear a lot is, oh, but this expert or that expert said it. That's an appeal to expert. That is a logical fallacy. We do not do things because one person is an expert and they say that we ought to do this. If you look at the results, the honest results, not the skewed results, of Washington and Oregon, where pot has been legalized, the results are not good. Child use, as predicted, has gone up. To the argument that marijuana is already legal here, and so, or it's already, you know, people can get it, they can access it, that may be so, but they have to take criminal measures to do so. And that actually, that very stress of taking that criminal measure is actually conducive to stopping the spread in the city and surrounding areas. When America was founded, we were not founded for just every Tom, Dick, and Harry to get involved in politics. The vast majority of citizens who are here tonight, I would invite to do your civic duty and to be able to pass a basic civics test. Because if I took a basic civics test tonight and 90% of the people in this room would fail, I already know the statistics, I've studied them. Additionally, 90% of the people in this room have never read 5 biographies of the founders of this nation. So what's been done is what's called sophism, where you take an actual knowledge of what is actually so, and sophism is basically you use these clever arguments like they had slaves or they took the Indians' land or all other kinds of nonsense, and you discard the knowledge that
Mr. Messina, would you get to the point, please?
I am doing that, and I would recommend...
No, you're not. Would you get to the point, please?
I recommend you read 5 biographies of the founders. I recommend that.
Sir?
Have you read 5 biographies of the founders?
Mr. Messina, get to your point,
No, I would
please.
like to know if you have read that.
Madam Clerk, would you give him 15 seconds because of my interruption, please?
Thank you. So we as a society either have to do our civic duty or we are going to lose those freedoms that we were all given when we were born. So a couple of quotes. Only a virtuous people can have freedom. As nations become more corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. Laws without morals are in vain. Sell not virtue to purchase wealth. Now, the word virtue does not really come out of many people's mouths, and I don't think I've heard it at this podium ever. I think we need to study what virtue means, because that's a really credible point. If we're not virtuous, we don't have freedom, we literally become slaves. Marijuana is an enslaving habit. I cannot stress that more importantly. That's all I have.
Leo Kavanaugh, followed by Joel Garcia, Seneca Messina, Rick Seregni, and Anthony.
Leo Kavanaugh, 630 Alabama Street. I'm asking you to consider very carefully not having the dispensaries or marijuana sales near residential districts. I live very close to the VHHC, which is on Tennessee Street at Sutter Street. My address is on Alabama Street, so even though it sounds like I'm a block away, I went out and measured from my back fence to the building, and it's just under 20 feet. The funny thing, when I was out there measuring, I'm smelling pot. I'm looking around, and there's nobody there. I realize it's coming out of their ventilation system. So anyway, we have odors. We have the big inflated waving man that was terrorizing the neighborhood dogs. The parking has gotten, not parking, the traffic has gotten much worse since that place moved in. And with careless driving, not just more cars, but people rolling the stop signs and things. They have this parking lot sign with big letters well over 2 feet high. It's not very attractive. But my real concern is that these places are dangerous. We have armed guards there. I don't want to live next to a place that has armed guards. And that just says that's not appropriate near residences. My work brings me to a lot of upscale communities, and I don't see the proliferation of pot clubs around there like we have here. And I think we have to ask, who are we modeling ourselves after? Who are we striving to emulate? When I think we need to take a model, what the other communities are doing, and ask, is this who we are? So please keep the marijuana sales away from residential districts. Thank you.
Thank you. Joel Garcia.
Thank you, elected officials. My name is Joel Garcia. I live at 1404 Carl Avenue. Everybody has this idea that cannabis is some kind of evil drug. Cannabis, by nature, is non-toxic. If you look up the Latin word toxicum, that word means poison. Cannabis has no LD50, no lethal dose known to man. So it's not like Vicodin or opiates. It is a medicine, but it's more like chicken soup. It helps any condition, but you don't have to be sick to benefit from it. We are in the middle of an opioid crisis, and we need to consider harm reduction. Statistics say that areas that allow cannabis use recreationally have seen a 25% decrease in the damage that's caused from opioid abuse. Everybody's worried about children getting access to cannabis. Well, I would worry about children getting access to the opiates in their medicine cabinet. We are a town in transition. We need revenue to help make this transition be a positive one. Whether that is coming from the proposed cement factory or from cannabis use is up for you all to decide what is best. I would say cannabis use is a much healthier, harmless, benign substance than the air we're going to be breathing from the cement factory. People are concerned about how these dispensaries look to the neighborhood. Well, if you want to put in some new laws in place, put in good neighbor laws. Make that be something that's enforceable. Our police in this town have to worry about children being kidnapped, and they're not concerned about children smoking cannabis. So we need to keep our perspective based in reality. Lastly, I just want to say that by allowing recreational use in this town will create jobs as these businesses grow. Vallejo is filled with underemployed and unemployed people, and we need jobs. Some of us, like myself, already have an education background in the cannabis industry, but I can't find a job because there's so few locations that are hiring. However, with the increase of business, with the increase of tax revenue, there's going to be an increase of employment. And this is good for everybody. Thank you. That is all I have to say.
Thank you. Seneca Messina.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, elected officials, for allowing us to speak here tonight. I'm here tonight in support of adult use cannabis sales in Vallejo. I've worked here at a prominent dispensary in town since 2014. I'm very fortunate to work in such a positive environment. There has always been room for growth and advancement within the company, but without the approval of adult use sales in Vallejo, I fear that growth may come to an end. We have begun to feel the effects of the drastic decrease in sales and patient visits. In 2018, we were consistently signing up 15, 20, 25 new patients a day. In the first month of 2018, we have seen no more than 5 a day, and it's more like 2 or 3. Some of us have already had our hours cut down at the shop, and there have been talk of layoffs. As a sole provider of a family of 6 with 4 children, I depend heavily on the dispensary I work at to support that family. That's why I'm here today. This is the first time I've ever come to a city council meeting here at Vallejo, but I feel like a statement needs to be made before it's too late. Let's see. I only hope that together, all of us in the cannabis community, as well as people maybe not friendly or maybe not with the cannabis community. If we all work together, like the gentleman before me said, we impose good neighbor laws. Everyone just tries to be good to each other. I think we can all prosper as a community, cannabis community as well as non-cannabis community. Like the young lady said at the beginning in our opening statement, dispensaries have been reporting 50% decrease. I want to say it's more like 60 to 70 because I work the front desk, so I get all the calls of people asking if recreational has come yet. People, I see them get turned away from the front door all day long. It's just a huge decrease. So, like I said, supporting a family, myself as well as a lot of other folks that work in dispensaries across town are all fearful for their jobs, fearful for their wages. You know, it's pretty bad right now. So I hope you guys can approve adult use in Vallejo. Like a couple people before me also said, tax revenues will greatly increase, and I think we'll all want to see that. So, and that could also translate into school improvements, street improvements, all kinds of city improvements. So, tax revenue.
Thank you. Mr. Rick Saregi.
Honorable Mayor, Council, staff, thank you for letting us speak tonight. I'm here to echo some of the other people like Seneca that just spoke, because we're in an emergency situation right now, my business and the other dispensaries here in Vallejo. Between adult use and recreational, there seems to be some confusion. And if you look at the facts, there's basically no difference between adult use and medical right now, unfortunately, the way the state of California has it. The state only recognizes a state-issued ID card that you get through your county. That for the past year, collectively, the 10 or 11 dispensaries in town have been promoting, because you can save the sales tax. Nobody wants to get the state card to save the sales tax because you go into a database that could put you with that you use medical cannabis. And we could all think of reasons why if we use medical cannabis, it might be an ex-police officer, a retired person, a school teacher, a district attorney, could be anybody. So they might not want to get into that database. In the first 35 days of January at HTP Group, which I represent, we've seen one state ID. Over the last year, I think we've signed up 3 people that actually were interested and got the state ID. And when we're talking about turning down 20, 30 patients a day, something you have to think about, the people that are concerned about the impact, is these are 20, 30 patients that were patients of ours, but they want adult use. They don't want to buy a card or get into a database. It's not, we're just trying to retain the people that we already have. You're not going to see increases from what we have been giving you as far as tax revenues go. We're just trying to keep it balanced. You're going to see a huge difference when we pay our taxes for January. We are down, collect just HTP Group, 30% in the first month of the year. And we have had to cut our hours back. We're as thin as we can. And we might not have any other option than to lay off a lot of Vallejo citizens that work for us. We need adult use. We also need vertical integration. The cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution is imperative to our survival. And as some of you might know, the map that came out several months ago, there was some sort of a hiccup that I just found out through planning, that the White Slough specific plan, some of the clubs that were in there that were told we were in this area that works with the zoning, we may not be good now. And we've been told and under the impression that it is. So for being able to do cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution in our area would be very vital. Am I done?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anthony, would you be kind enough to please state your last name for the record, please?
Yes, my last name is Primer.
Anthony Primer.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. So I'd just like to start by saying that as an employee in the industry, I also have noticed a huge drop in the number of patients that we would like to be seeing, and we are turning a huge number of people away to other cities, and there's a lot of business that's being lost there. I've been having my hours cut and kind of fearful of not being able to work here anymore, so I've actually had to take on a second job just to kind of provide myself with that kind of security. But I'd also like to just read off a recent review that we had on Weed Maps, which is kind of like the Yelp for the industry. It goes on to say, I had absolutely loved this place until the start of 2018 when recreational cannabis started and prices went up. Now HTP doesn't have much or any compassionate prices anymore. It's really unfortunate because it's been my go-to club for over 4 years, and even before they closed down for a while. This person has chosen to not renew their cannabis card and just buy off of the streets because it's cheaper now that way. And they hope of success and that stuff. But that kind of just goes to show you what the public is kind of doing in response to this unavailability and blocked access in what's really just a holistic medicine. And if you kind of just take a look around, and as a active citizen, you can look at what people are prescribed and alcohol and all this other stuff that's available, and the war on drugs just got to stop. You know, this is kind of an example of why, in a lot of ways, we're falling behind in as a society. But furthermore, I just wanted to add that the tax revenues that could be collected from adult use businesses could be spent on better academic research and evaluation on just the exact things that the assistant city manager was mentioning with the poor testing methods and tools. So that's one area that the tax revenues could help out. Additionally, it could go into just general funding for the city, adult education as well as youth education, and overall just better access to clean medicine that I think a lot of people really deserve, especially with what's going on in the world today, especially with geoengineering. If you're a really active citizen, you would know about geoengineering and the health impacts that has as a society. So I also encourage everybody to check that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Jimmy Sarmiento, Wanda Maderos, Eric Zomp, Paula Bauer, and Dante De La Serna. After Dante De La Serna, I will no longer be accepting any cards, so if you do wish to speak, get your card in, please.
Good evening again. My name is Jimmy Sarmiento. I'm a Vallejo resident. I just handed out, actually, these are copies of actual receipts of orders I've made out of Vallejo. These are for non-psychoactive cannabis medication, ordered from 2 vendors, one in San Francisco and one in Petaluma. And we'll show you how Vallejo loses out on the taxes. It charges a 15% state tax, but no excise tax for Vallejo. And the point of this is that Vallejo is missing out on taxes from people who buy outside of Vallejo. And these are products that are available everywhere. And it's going to be here, it's around. And if we don't get our act together, we're going to miss out on this. On a personal note, last year, about this time last year, I decided to be an investor in this industry. So I tried to educate myself, and I enrolled in a Institute of Higher Learning. I studied basic and advanced kind of business at Amsterdam University and got my diploma in October. And I decided after that I don't want to invest here. But I have actually investments in companies that do lighting, packaging, lab testing, hydroponics, pharmaceuticals, even a real estate investment trust that buys warehouses and rents out to producers, and a lot of Canadian producers. I've also looked at financials for an Oakland dispensary, and the margins are not that great. So I really admire the folks here who are in the industry, because it's not as great as it sounds. I mean, they are tenacious in doing what they are. It's not easy money. It's hard money. And I have to also say that I also buy locally for stuff. And last Friday I was at Morris's shop, and I have to commend your folks. You run a really good shop over at the Relief. And it's getting to be a mainstream industry now. In fact, today I received my monthly marijuana business magazine. It's a subscription, and it's mainstream. I mean, it's not something that you hide under the bed anymore. It's not like whatever. So it's mainstream. It's there, and if we hide our head under the sand, we're going to lose out. Thank you.
Thank you. Wanda Medeiros, followed by Eric Zomp, followed by Paula Bauer and Dante de la Serna.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council, City staff, and my fellow Vallejoans. Tonight I'm representing Homemade Holistic Collective because the owners had a prior commitment, could not be here. Regarding the adult use cannabis, I would like to highlight some current information. The criminal sharks are in the water circling Vallejo right now, and those are the criminal elements that are growing their illegal sales while legitimate businesses are declining rapidly. At our dispensary, we turn away at least 25 to 30 people a day. The first day that it was legal, we turned away almost 70 people. So we have a little calculation here that we've studied. Most of our customers average out $50 per sale. So if you take the low end of that, we're looking at $455,000 extra a year on the low end. On the high end, almost $1.3 million extra a year. That's a lot of tax money for this city. Our dispensary cannot make our own edibles for our patients. We need to be able to have a small kitchen on our property around 1,200 square feet, which isn't much, as well as a small cultivation area around 3,500 square feet that we can make our edibles, oils, balms, etc., and be able to grow our own specialized strains that are high in CBD for our products that our sick patients need. In closing, I find it quite calloused when I hear city staff say, well, you can't manufacture on your current site because it's not zoned for that. So you can just move to another location. Well, we can't just move. We've leased property. There's a contract. We have spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars to renovate that property that we are in, and have notified the city since before even leasing that particular site that our plans were to also manufacture and cultivate on that site. Why is the current linear commercial designation zoned for custom manufacturing but not for MMD manufacturing? I would like to ask the City Council to allow current MMDs who have the room to grow on their locations to be able to do so. Grandfather us in, as you would do with any other tax business who was in operation before the codes and zoning were changed. Thank you.
Eric Zomp, followed by Paula Bauer and Dante de la Serna.
Hi, my name's Eric Zomp. I am a 16-year resident of Vallejo. And before I actually get started, I did want to make mention, it seemed like there was a bit of an editorial comment under unknown impacts with the little blood and guts scene there. We probably could have done without that one. Because I think about how many people in this room probably know somebody who's been killed or injured with alcohol-related accident, but you still drink. So just a little comment on that. And I would hope today that we'd all be blessed with the virtue of rationality and the desire to deal in good faith. So what I'm going to pitch today is say that maybe a phased-in approach would be something to consider, letting the current dispensaries sell recreational cannabis and work on enforcement and good neighbor laws. Because I can definitely feel for the folks who've been on the end of a bad actor, because I have a bad rental next to me, and I sure as heck wish that they would get out of my neighborhood. In the meantime, I think if you don't move forward, you're just kind of slaughtering the cash cow at this point. Not to mention you're letting down patients, business owners, people who work there, and these businesses are just going to die on the vine. My other comment is a little bit about the actual state regs, and I worked for almost 20 years in the pharma industry, and 16 of those years was in quality and regulatory compliance. And the state regs are pharmaceutical quality regulation. So the state really has a lot of this stuff covered. And also, to put it into perspective, the only thing that's really more regulated than pharma is nuclear and probably aviation at this point. But so, regulating a lot of this other stuff outside would probably a better use of your time. Also, some of the questions I have about zoning and land use, sometimes I think it's used as a convenient catch-all, some kind of puritanical ruse used to relegate and ghettoize the cannabis businesses. I mean, we have bakeries, pharmacies, liquor stores, auto repair shops, all of these other kind of businesses that have a lot more in common, and it's like, just because it's weed, we have to be afraid of it. I mean, I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't be concerned about some of the federal issues, but we don't know till we get there. Anyway, thank you for your time. And Benicia, white bread, no crust Benicia, they're a lot closer than we are. Thanks.
Thank you. Paula Bauer.
Hi, my name's Paula Bauer. I'm a Vallejo resident since 2000.
Paula, could you pull the mic up just a little bit, please? Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah, very much.
Better. Vallejo resident since 2005, and I am here to encourage you to do something about adult use marijuana. Not to repeat what half a dozen people before me have said, but our dispensaries are dying. I went into Relief the other day. I was the only customer. That has never happened to me in the 2+ years I've been going there. There was one person selling. They're talking about having to lay people off. And you got to contrast that with what's going on in Monterey. I mean, they've been down to Monterey talking about opening a dispensary there, and they're treated well. They're helped. They're not forced to move 4 times because of zoning. The city is going to lose a lot. If we lose our dispensaries, we pretty much lose our disposable income, is my understanding of the city's budget. The taxes these guys are paying in are pretty much the only thing we have to play with anymore. And our failure to do anything on recreational is killing the dispensaries we have. I don't want to lose access to my medicine. I don't want the dispensaries to have to lay people off. I don't want the city to go bankrupt because people are fleeing elsewhere because it's cheaper. And I do want to address for just a second the gentleman that spoke earlier about the nightmare that he's living next to the dispensary on Tennessee. Don't let that be a reason to stop you from acting. There are ways to deal with that. It's called enforcement. and the city isn't enforcing the laws you already have on the books. The black market in this town for weed is rampant. That's all I have to say. Please, please, keep our dispensaries alive.
Thank you. Dante De La Serna, and after Mr. De La Serna is finished, I will no longer be accepting any other cards. Before you begin, Mr. De La Serna, the next speakers will be Morgan Hannigan, Brenda Crawford, James Hinton, and ending with Tina Fowler. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, council members and city staff. My name is Dante De La Serna, and I work at Fighting Back Partnership, where I coordinate the Vallejo Community Change Coalition, which is a community group that strives to create a healthy environment for Vallejo kids and families that minimizes the negative impacts of alcohol, tobacco, drugs, and other unhealthy products. Fighting Back Partnership also receives funding from Solano County Public Health to coordinate the coalition to reduce youth access and availability to these products. I brought my policy recommendations for you to consider on behalf of the coalition. I'll provide that to you after I speak, but I just wanted to verbally just highlight 3 items. Again, distance from child-sensitive areas. It's important that marijuana retailers, just like tobacco and alcohol retailers, be located a minimum distance, preferably 1,000 feet from schools, daycares, healthcare facilities, youth centers, parks, etc. 1,000 feet is a common distance in other cities such as Dixon and Napa, and is a safeguard to reduce access and social normalization of marijuana to youth. Regular monitoring and prevention. Ensure that taxes and fees associated with a permit to sell marijuana adequately cover the costs for regular monitoring and enforcement of local and state regulations. This should include addressing sales and promotion, marketing of products to minors, and any potential nuisances that may impact adjacent businesses and residents, as we've heard earlier. Meaningful consequences. Build in meaningful and graduated consequences for non-compliant businesses that include suspension and revocation of permit to encourage lawful and responsible business operation. In closing, when considering the recreational marijuana retailers, bear in mind that Vallejo, as of today, currently has more medical marijuana dispensaries than all of the other cities in Solano County combined. Again, we have 11. The dispensaries are more than the cities of Berkeley, which has 3, population of 121,000 in 2016, and in Oakland, which has 8 currently, population 420,000. This is important because the number of retailers you allow and where they can locate is critical. Really, how many businesses does our city need? How many businesses does Vallejo residents need? As you look at the marijuana businesses as potential revenue for the city, consider strong regulations that mitigate the negative social costs as mentioned. Building the Vallejo economy through marijuana retailers must also take into account the safety, health, and quality of life of youth and families. Thanks for your time, and I have some recommendations for you folks.
Thank you. I'll no longer be accepting any other cards. Next speaker will be Morgan Hannigan, followed by Brenda Crawford, James Hinton, ending with Tina Fowler. I think we have one more after.
Couple things. One, I sent an email to the city clerk with a PowerPoint that includes, or it addresses some of the issues that have been raised by some of the people that are hesitant to allow adult use sales. It'll point you to studies done in states that have legalized adult use that show that there haven't been an increase in DUIs, teen use and child use is down, there's no uptick in crime, et cetera, et cetera. To the last speaker, I don't know who wants more businesses in town. I think citizens who need jobs want more businesses in town. That, seems pretty simple to me. But what we're talking about right now is about keeping businesses alive, right? And you're not really talking about allowing adult use, because I got news for you. There are 14 unregulated, unpermitted, unlicensed, untax-paying operations in town that are currently doing adult use. So you're really talking about leveling the playing field for those of us that have tried to negotiate in good faith and work with the city and follow all of the rules that have been set forth. I don't want to harp on all that, but I would like to see us have access to the same market that some of these illegal operators are currently thriving in. There's a myriad of problems ranging from supply, where all of these previous cultivators are now unlicensed and looking to move their product. The natural place for them to go are these unlicensed deliveries, where they don't have a state license, they're not audited, they're not required to operate within the Prop 64 guidelines. So now we have people who have unlimited operating hours, unlimited access to a flooded market of cannabis, right, that all of our previous patients had access to but now don't. And you know, they've got the products that patients want, and it's easy for patients to get. You know, there's a 24-hour delivery service in town. I could call, are we at 8 o'clock yet? I could have weed delivered here in 30 minutes from an illegal operation. And they're not paying any money. And if we continue to lose business at the rate that we've been losing, if we're down 30% and we make almost $3 million, if we're not done with this by June, that means we lose $500,000. Right? And I'm not embellishing that. That's like a minimal side. If we're losing 50% of our business, it gets even worse. I had an employee put in there 2 weeks a little while back, and thank God they did, because otherwise I'm looking at cutting people. And I don't want to have to make that decision. I really hope we can get this done quickly, hopefully before June as it was printed in the staff report, because like I said, that means the city will be losing out on about $500,000. So please, and thank you for addressing this.
Thank you. Brenda Crawford, followed by James Hinton.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. And welcome to the new city manager. In case you want to know, the only person who objected to your hiring, you want to know who that person was, that was me. So, the other thing is that I would suggest that fighting back, choose something legitimate to fight back against, like the homelessness and the rampant untreated mental illness that is in our streets. That is more legitimate to fight back against than for people who look to the marijuana, the medical marijuana dispensaries for our medication. Tell you a story. I retired in 2013, and in 2015, I underwent a 7-hour back surgery. It was not my idea around retiring and becoming disabled, but you know, you never know. You have to deal with the hand that was dealt you. I looked at my x-rays a couple of days ago, and I have more hardware in my back that should trigger out the metal detectors at the airport, and I'm lucky that it does not. When I had my surgery, my doctor gave me a prescription for 50 milligrams of tramadol 3 times a day. You know, I'm 70 years old. 50 milligrams of tramadol 3 times a day. Tramadol is the medication that they give football players and people who suffer from severe chronic pain. I went about trying to figure out a better way to live my life, even with my disability, rather than sitting on my couch and drooling in my soup, which is what the tramadol would have done for me. I went about exploring ways to manage my chronic pain in a more holistic and natural way, and I found cannabis. I need to say that the guys in the dispensary business have been my best friends. They have treated me with dignity and respect as I have gone about trying to live my life with chronic pain and be of service to my fellow human beings here in Vallejo. But I am profoundly disappointed at my city leaders. I had a friend of mine call me up the other day and say, you know what, Brenda, I can't afford my medicine anymore. I can't afford it. I can't afford to go into my dispensary because what used to cost me $50 now costs me $80. And what I have to do is make a decision whether I want to go with one of these illegal guys that's running around Vallejo and have them deliver stuff to my house and pray that I don't get robbed. You know, it's a choice of either having an illegal person come to my house, and, you know, we don't know that illegal people have criminal intent, but we do know that they're engaging in criminal behavior. So I would ask you all to really consider folks like me, and you can keep buzzing me, folks like me who have lived in this city and who love this city and who try and live the best quality life I can, to really consider adult use for cannabis in Vallejo. Thank you.
Thank you. Tina Fowler, ending with Paul Paulson.
James Hinton. I just want to add to what we've been talking about the last couple times I've been up here. So this afternoon in Napa, the planning commissioner, Rick Tooker, I saw him today. He said that there are 2 permits in and a third one will be in with a variance. City's working to give variances to get clubs in there. They're going to be selling medical cannabis just like you. So if you have recreational, you're going to have something Napa won't have. A couple weeks ago, I was at the American Canyon meeting where they had a community discussion about it. It was in the newspaper. Somebody there told me they are selling, I hate to say this, zips for $65 in Vallejo on the black market. A zip is an ounce. The black market, he's telling me, is $65 an ounce in Vallejo. So I think Morgan gave you a lot of good reasons why that is that. He basically explained it to you with what's going on. So I really want to encourage you to immediately introduce recreational sales. These 11 clubs have proven they are outstanding at providing access to cannabis, and they're already wired to do this for this industry. You need the money for your police department and other city services. You want to keep your customers coming in. You want to retain that. And, you know, Napa is famous for its wine. And there are wineries that people tour because they were there before Prohibition. All right? 50 years from now, people could be talking about Vallejo being like one of the renegade cities in the Proposition 215 era, how they had at one time 30-plus clubs, and, you know, there's all this stuff. You know, Better Health Group could become a museum where they've had 3 raids by the police department, and it could be a place that's, wow, where'd the police come in? And, you know, and this could be something people tour one day. You could be famous for this thing. But if you go ahead now and continue to, like, try to kill this business, you're just not going to look great when you come up for election again, whenever that is. I mean, if you talk to the people in this town, they are passionate about this stuff. You know, if you go to Napa and you say, hey, what's your favorite flower? You might hear, oh, I like roses, I like poinsettias, I like lilies. You might hear that out here. But you're going to hear a lot of people say, I like cookies, I like Granddaddy Purple. When people talk about flowers, this is the kind of stuff they're talking about out here. The people in this town, I mean, they really love it. We've heard people through the years who moved to this town because it was affordable and it was welcoming to them because they were sick and this helped them.
Thank you. Tina Fowler, ending with Paul Paulson.
Thanks, guys, for letting me talk again. I think I've talked more about marijuana in the last year than I have in my entire life. So I don't want to talk about statistics because every statistic that the clubs show you, Fighting Back is going to show you the counter. I don't want to talk about that. We voted for it. It needs to be regulated. We have 11 clubs that have proven to be good neighbors. They've proven to be good community partners. They came to you guys a year and a half ago and said, this is on the ballot. This is going to pass. We need to be working on this. We asked staff to work on this. Joanna at a meeting last fall said it'll be a priority to get this done by the end of the year because we know January 1st recreation is going to be legal. I am asking you tonight to let the 11 clubs that have proven that they're good, that have done every little thing that the city has asked them to do for the last year and a half, I'm asking you to let them sell recreation tomorrow so that we don't use them. We can continue working on the plan, we can continue working on the policy, we can continue working on what we're going to do for new and what we're going to do for growth and what we're going to do for all of that. But these 11 clubs are being hurt, they're being chased out, and if I ever have to see one more It's Better in Benicia bumper sticker and it relates to the fact that we were ahead of the game and now we can't even sell recreational weed, that's a problem. That's a problem. So please, let the clubs who have proven to be good neighbors and proven to if you need to put good neighbor laws on, I can tell you someone complained about VHHC. My business is 5 doors away. I have no problem with VHHC. I'm not behind them, but I have no problem with VHHC. There was an accident on our street. They had cameras that helped us figure out what was wrong. They've proven to be good neighbors. So let's let them continue their business while we figure out what it is we haven't been able to figure out in the last 16 months. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Paulson.
Thank you for having this meeting and listening to our concerns and what we want to do. My name is Paul Paulson. My wife and I are licensed cannabis workers in the state of Oregon and licensed administrators there. We'll be getting licensed here as soon as it is all set up in the state. One of the things that a lot of people aren't noticing is the fact that when there was prohibition of alcohol, people still made alcohol, people still drank alcohol, but the problem was the manufacturing, the distribution was all unregulated, so you had people getting things that were actually poisoning and killing them, and that's happening right now with cannabis as well. The black market is not regulated. The black market product is not tested, is not analyzed. Any dispensary that's selling medical right now, and it will be set up for commercial as well for adult use, all of that product is analyzed and tested and certified. It's pesticide free. There aren't any contaminants in it. But when people are going out and buying this on the black market, they have no assurances of what that product contains. Right now, 70% of the black market out there is contaminated with E20, this pesticide that protects plants. If you put it on a green bean, you can eat that green bean and be safe. But if you put it on a product that is combusted, it creates carcinogens and can kill people. Anything that's bought through legal means are going to be safe for all of the people out there, but right now we have a lot of people buying that black market product and it's killing them or will kill them in the future. My partner is a medical doctor. He's a pain management specialist trained at Johns Hopkins, and his biggest concern is that, as other people have stated, the opioid crisis. There are people out there that are dying every day, that are having their kidneys fail, that are having their livers fail, that are having different organs fail, that are having all kinds of medical problems because of these opioids. And we would really like to see an alternative that is safe, that is ethical, and that is cannabis. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Before we go into comments and questions from council, we're going to take a 10-minute break. go before me because I'm, yeah. Huh? Yeah. Okay, folks, I'm going to call us back to order. Can I get somebody to close that back door for me, please? Last person in, could you close the back door for me? Thank you. Okay, special meeting of the Vallejo City Council is now back in session, and going to open it up to comments, questions from council members. Don't all click those lights on at one time. Okay. Anybody? Nobody. Okay. Go ahead, Councilmember McConnell.
Okay.
Down. There you go.
This issue has been a subject matter that many of us have commented on depth repeatedly. And for me to strike a dead horse again about the speed with which this project is moving, I don't think is going to accomplish much tonight, but you know I've been frustrated by this for a long time. It is my understanding that the ad hoc committee views this as being a Tier 2 priority. I would like to propose to my colleagues tonight, and I suggest that we make this a Tier 1 priority this evening. And that is simply because the speakers have all spoken of what we knew was coming. Not new. Just as an example, if you have a medical license and it is coming up for expiration, why in the world would you want to spend the money on another doctor for another exam and another fee to the state when for the equivalent of $5 per trip you can drive to Oakland or even now up to Dixon for free? It just doesn't make any sense. But by doing what we've been doing, by procrastinating and taking our time and being extra careful and trying to dot all of our I's and cross all of our T's and think of everything under the sun, we're buying in and reinforcing that long-held perception that Vallejo is anti-business. And I know that there's a lot of feelings that this is not necessarily a business. I can understand the viewpoints and the differences on that. But in reality, that's what it is. And it simply reflects the way we're handling business applications in this city. And I believe that attitude desperately needs to change, and it needs to change tonight. So I would request my colleagues express their concerns and their beliefs about making this a Tier 1 priority. I've even proposed that we consider emergency ordinances on this. I'm not sure it totally... I'm not sure it totally meets the legal definition of emergency, but nonetheless, the need for urgency is obviously very clear. And even, in my opinion, waiting until April is too long of a wait. I would like to have seen this in effect by the 1st of January. Having said that, let me move on to some specific positions in response to some of the comments. I would like to ask planning about this difficulty expressed by some of the dispensaries that they've had to move multiple times because of zoning, and that they might have to again move. To me, that doesn't make any sense. I think we're opening ourselves up to litigation claims for improper handling of them, for not advising people properly. And again, it's another reflection of not handling business applicants properly. One in particular I know of on Sonoma Boulevard is a large facility. It does abut a residential area, but they certainly have the capacity which to do cultivation, growth, and quality control. But because of the present zoning of that, they are not permitted to do so. And We can go down the variance process and asking them to submit application fees and go through a planning commission variance procedure in order to arrive at the same result. Better yet, I think I would like to address that in your proposals to come to us hopefully before April, so that we can, in essence, grandfather all of the 11 district dispensaries we have now into place. Now, I recognize some of them may be physically too small to do cultivation, and, well, that's their choice. They picked that facility to start with. But for those who do have the physical capacity with which to expand into the other areas, then I think we need to accommodate them rather than the other way around. I am concerned about the difficulties expressed by at least two speakers tonight with respect to how it is impacting them in residential areas. There are always difficulties when one zone interfaces with another zone. We try to solve that somewhat through screening, but I think we've addressed in the past the need for odor control, and if in fact some dispensary is not complying with that odor control restriction, then they need to be investigated. And I'm not at all adverse to shutting down any one or all of the 11 dispensaries if they do not comply with reasonable requirements that are designed to protect the citizenry. So maybe we need to start going back out and doing site visits to see if the 11 dispensaries are in compliance. One of the things we often require at a planning commission hearing is a community access telephone number, an 800 number, where anybody can call up and say, I'm having a difficulty with an ugly puppet on the roof, and there'll be somebody there, a live person, 24 hours a day, who can respond to that and needs to respond to it. So with the protection that being an established dispensary provides comes the burden as well. So if there is one or more of the 11 dispensary operators that aren't stepping up to the plate, well, not only does the city need to address those concerns, but the industry itself can put pressure upon its own members, because it's going to wind up hurting the rest of you if that type of practice does continue. I heard also a representation tonight that there are 14 unlicensed black market dispensaries, and certainly the city attorney's office has been very proficient and attentive to putting out of business those dispensaries that have cropped up from time to time, but it may appear that there needs to be a redoubling of that effort. And if so, I will support efforts, including financial expenditures, to make that happen and happen as rapidly as possible. We've long had this discussion in this city about the distance between a dispensary and other protective areas such as schools, parks, daycare centers. And I think the state regulation does require 600 at a minimum. At one time, I believe we had a 1,000-foot separation, and then we apparently have gone back down to the 600. I'm in favor of the 1,000-foot. And I say that because I distinctly recall Andrew Ouse, our then planning director, saying that you can go to 600 if you desire. That's certainly within your purview. However, we've done the analysis, and by going to that 600-foot restriction instead of the 1,000, you will deny and make unavailable a large number of sites in this city simply because of the geographic arrangement of how our city is constructed. So I would urge my colleagues tonight to support a 1,000-foot requirement for separation from sensitive areas rather than the 600-foot allocation as well. I do believe that the 11 dispensaries should be permitted to participate both in delivery, cultivation, research, which I don't see discussed much, and sales as well, if their physical facility can accommodate that. So those are my observations as direction of growth, but overall, I just need to see a faster speed here, folks. It's just got to happen faster than it has. So thank you.
Thank you. Before I call on the other council members, there's some comments that I'd like to make. So I have everybody's all lined up and queued, ready to go. But before that, I'm not going to be as eloquent as Councilmember McConnell. I'm going to get kind of right to the point with this. And we have been working on this project for quite some time now, as many of you know. You've been very patient with us, and I thank you for your patience. But we need to get this done. We need to get this completed. I'm not wanting to make this a Tier 1 project. I don't want to make it a Tier 1 project at all. I want to work on an emergency ordinance to move this forward, to get adult use recreational up and running now, to get cultivation up, moving, and running now, to get manufacturing up, moving, and running now, as well as figuring out a way to handle delivery. A speaker handed us this sheet that indicates that delivery from San Francisco, we missed out on a bunch of tax there. There were some drops that were delivered that we missed out on tax there. There are, from speaking with the proprietors of our MMDs, I'm hearing that there are many delivery folks that are coming into town that are just black market people. How we go to enforce that, I don't know. We talked about doing stings. We talked about all kinds of things. But quite frankly, I'm really not sure how we're going to accomplish that based on the amount of police officers that we have and the priorities that we have in the city as a whole. I'm very concerned about the good neighbor policy. That is critical to me. Listening to Mr. Bull talk about the issues of business behind him, his dogs being annoyed by whatever that thing was on the roof of that business, so on and so forth, that urinating in the alley that somebody was talking about, the smell of cannabis being smoked was fresh in the air. So we need to talk about being good neighbors. You folks are businesses just like anybody else, and we've been trying to treat you like businesses, like everybody else. But conversely, you're going to have to help us, and that goes into policing your own. So one of the things that I'd like to do, Joanna, is come up with what we believe, along with the proprietors, what a good neighbor policy should be. We should be talking to neighbors. We should be finding out what a good neighbor policy should be. These 14 illegal dispensaries, folks, you know who they are. We don't. If you would talk to us about it, we would sure love to have our city attorney's office, code enforcement, and other regulatory agencies go after these people. If they're operating illegally in our community, they don't have the right to be here, because they're not just hurting you, the legal businesses, but they're hurting the rest of the community, and it's impacting all of us in terms of what you're bringing in as your bottom line and the tax dollar that we're getting as our bottom line. So we need to discuss that a whole lot more. The adult use is weighing very heavily on me, the recreational, and again, I talked to the three of you during our break. We discussed where we're thinking. Ms. Mooney all but reads minds, so she knew that I was going to be getting into this emergency ordinance. I really want us to really think good and hard about that. We need to move this forward. This has taken far too long. We just need to get it done. And that said, I'll probably have a few more comments towards the end. So, oh yeah, I do have one last thing. If there are some dispensaries that are in violation, similar to the one that was being discussed by Mr. Bowl and Mr. Kavanaugh, we need to go and take another visit. And if that, whatever that thing was on the roof is an illegal sign, it needs to go away. If their garbage isn't being put away appropriately, that needs to get resolved. Whatever these issues are that are causing the quality of life of the neighborhood to suffer, they need to be taken care of. So that's something we should be discussing soon. So that said, I'm going to move on to Councilmember Verder Aliga. You were up next.
Thank you, Mayor Sampayan. Okay, so thank you to all the speakers, including Fighting Back Speaker Dante de la Serna. So I'm in agreement with what Councilmember McConnell and Mayor Sampayan stated. My thought is, or my opinion is, you know, in Vallejo, marijuana, the MMDs are, I think, the most heavily regulated business in this town. And I couldn't agree more. I wish it wasn't. I agree with regulation, but, you know, we just have such a, this community needs to have a paradigm shift. We have to look at marijuana use, recreational use, adult use, and medical marijuana use as the new industry, in not only in our city, but in the whole country. Eventually, I think my wish would be for the federal government to actually make marijuana use legal. So that's not up to me, but that's, you know, down the line, hopefully with our legislators in Washington, D.C. But with that said, locally, we as a community, whether we like it or not, it's here. I support adult use. I was together with Councilmember McConnell over a year ago. I supported the, or I mentioned the making it a priority. So now it's here. I'm glad it's here. And I wanted to just briefly talk about folks, you know, 14 illegal clubs, 14 illegal dispensaries. How could that be? I thought there were like 4 or 5, and I know that our city attorney's office and our police department have actually shut those down. And I'm just appalled that we have 14. And it's up to you folks that know where these dispensaries are to let us know. And for those consumers out there or adults that patronize the illegal clubs or illegal dispensaries, really shame on you. I mean, that's just not acceptable. But there will always be illegal sales and illegal users out there in sales. But it's really up to us, you as residents, to let us know and report those illegal sales. Otherwise, these things will continue, and that's not good for our city. So my question for staff is, how soon can we put an emergency ordinance or revision or urgent ordinance in place? So that's question 1. And then how can we integrate or look into virtual integration, which was mentioned by couple of our speakers earlier. So that's my second question. Maybe can you answer those first? How soon can we put an emergency measure, ordinance, however you call it, in place? And what is the process to make that happen?
So my best response for coming back with an emergency ordinance with the retail, it depends on what types of uses you're looking at. For retail use, it's possible to bring it back by April, potentially one of the meetings in March. That could be amended to allow retail sales of recreational marijuana at the existing medical marijuana dispensaries, in addition to delivery. As for cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution, which the City Council recently authorized those uses within the zoning code, the requirements that also exist in the zoning code for the Planning Commission to review with a 21-day notice and the a 10-day notice requirement for the City Council would delay that process, essentially bringing back adult use, manufacturing, cultivation, and distribution for the vertical integration piece.
Okay, so follow-up question. What was my other question?
I think it was around vertical integration.
Right,
Yeah, so that because we've zoned for it already, it would, to amend the zoning code to allow recreational, it would take longer for it to get through all the Planning Commission and public hearing requirements, and then with the City Council. In the staff report, we projected by July with amending the zoning code, possibly by June. I think we could come back with an emergency ordinance where we'd be amending Chapter 7.100, which is not the zoning code, as soon as February 27th. And that's something, again, for retail recreational sales at the existing marijuana dispensaries, and delivery would be the temporary, or would be the emergency.
So does that have to go through a first reading and second reading as well? So I want to know, when can they start selling recreational marijuana?
February 28th. We will bring an emergency ordinance.
On the 27th, which is a council meeting.
That's a regularly scheduled council meeting. An emergency ordinance can be introduced, adopted, and made effective right then.
Okay, and then the following day, the 28th, they can start
That's correct.
selling. Okay, so you heard that, folks, right? So at least we can get something going until we clean up the language, et cetera, et cetera.
That's
okay.
correct.
So that's good
what we had
news.
talked about in the ad hoc committee was the various concerns and possible solutions to deliveries coming in from outside of Vallejo. Because it's so hard to enforce. The one way to address it is not through legal enforcement, but through policy, which is to allow your incumbent dispensaries to go ahead and do delivery, and that would take away the demand from operators who are outside of Vallejo. So if we're going to do an emergency ordinance for retail recreational, our suggestion was delivery as well.
Okay. Good, thank you.
One addition to make to coming back with an emergency ordinance, again, because it's not in the zoning code, the site development standards would also not be there. And so some of the complaints that we've heard from residents that are living next door to some of the dispensaries is around traffic. And so some of those things are a little bit more difficult to enforce because they're not within the regulations that are set forth. And so the caution is as you look towards making permanent these uses in the zoning code, that there will be some time that it will take to actually be able to enforce. Recent changes adding the permit to operate did add some standards, including the sign, which was effective in eliminating the object on top of one of the buildings that was disrupting the neighborhood and the dogs. So that was something that we were able to enforce. But other things like parking are not things that we're able to enforce because they, of course, are technically an illegal land use.
Right, and that's where we would need the cooperation from the 11 dispensaries. You know, this city is really going the extra mile to make this happen. And putting in an emergency ordinance. So really, the 11 dispensaries, please work with the folks in your neighborhood and ensure that parking and traffic is addressed, because I know I'm guessing that once the emergency ordinance is passed, the following day you will get a lot of folks coming into your dispensaries. So please just prepare for that, assuming that it will be passed. So please plan ahead, okay? And then my other question is, how about the tax, the excise tax that will be imposed on adult use, on the recreational marijuana products? what tax rate is that going to be?
If you're asking about our Measure C tax that was passed by the voters in 2011, it will be the same. It's 10% on either type of marijuana, whether it's medicinal or recreational.
Okay. All right. So, let's see. Tax, virtual integration. Well, everything has been, I mean, most of my comments were already addressed by Mayor Sampain and Councilmember McConnell, so I don't want to belabor and repeat that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember DaCosta.
Thank you, Mayor Sampain. Couple questions. Can you refresh my memory on the ordinance we passed, the emergency ordinance? Was the zones that we allowed the uses industrial, business light industrial, and also the business limited residential?
So those were the general plan designations as adopted in August. The complementary zones in the code that we amended, which are those three for the designations, are industrial, limited industrial, and planned development industrial. But yes,
okay.
Or excuse me, intensive use.
Yeah, there's three: intensive use, limited, intensive use, and then PDI,
planned development industrial.
Right. Okay, thank you for that clarification. So for me, it's like short-term, long-term kind of visions. So short-term, definitely want to look at the emergency ordinance. That's essential. My overarching goal with all of this is to have our existing businesses thrive and be able to be successful. So that's my primary focus on all of my recommendations for the short term. And then long term, looking at the community's vision and what the look and feel of this business industry is in our community. So I'll go through, and just a quick comment on the 14 illegal dispensaries. Some community members and dispensary owners have brought to us in the past, but these 14 I have not heard about. I saw that somebody texted me something, but it's not loading, so I don't know what it is yet. And so just that comment. Okay, so then looking at the different areas. So manufacturing and cultivation, I definitely want to see the 11 existing dispensaries in the zones previously approved for medical, so the business limited residential, business light industrial, and the industrial zones permitted to those existing 11. More long-term vision, once our existing dispensaries and that industry is stabilized, then I'm willing to explore if expansion of those two categories makes sense. I just don't know if they do at this point. Question on delivery. I definitely want the existing 11 for the emergency. But I've had a lot of comments about allowing anyone with a state license that pays the Vallejo taxes to be allowed. And I'm curious, it seems to me from an enforcement perspective that it would be easier if an officer, just logistic-wise, pulls over a vehicle and the driver says, oh, I'm delivering product, and they, show their state license. How do we know, how does the officer know whether or not they've paid Vallejo taxes?
There's really no way for the police department to be able to know who's paying taxes and what the point of sale is. Sale means one thing for a delivery versus what sale means for a board of equalization for purposes of paying taxes, and in any event, tax payments, they're fairly private.
So I think for me, I want to just keep it with the existing 11 dispensaries. I think it would be easier from an enforcement perspective if an officer pulls a vehicle over and they have to show proof that they are affiliated with or, licensed by one of our existing 11 dispensaries. I just think that's a cleaner way to do it. On the sting comment, I think, and along the delivery lines, I think it would be a great idea to do a sting operation on the delivery with perhaps using our cadets so that we can get a 2-for-1 where we can identify sales to minors along with illegal delivery of product to our town. And do it like we do our DUI operations where we have, a targeted sting or set enforcement. Okay. I am concerned about kids. I heard a lot of comments, well, alcohol and opioids and mental health and all those are all issues for our community. The issue we're looking at tonight is marijuana, and I am concerned about kids getting it. Not that saying it makes it easier for them to access if our dispensaries are selling recreational, but it is something the community needs to be aware of. It is a concern. Minors should not be taking marijuana for recreational purposes at all. So on the retail side, I do have concerns. I mean, we clearly heard there was concerns about neighbors next to a dispensary. And so from my perspective, I think that a fair compromise might be for the short term, allowing the adult use retail recreational sales at the 11 existing dispensaries for a short period of time. And then the ones that are in the 3 uses or zones, business limited residential, business light industrial, and industrial, they are able to keep the recreational there. Those that are not in those zones are able to have a secondary location already that's already been approved, so they can have the recreational sales there. But I want to make sure that they're able to get the sales as soon as we're able to, so that they're not missing revenues, but are able to expand that, move that use, those sales to those other areas. So that way we are being sensitive to our residents. For the longer term vision, I think it's important that we do get community input to get an understanding of what the community wants to see. This industry came to us, in a backwards process. And thankfully, the 11 dispensaries that we do have been great to work with over the last year. And I appreciate all of your guys' efforts in keeping us informed on what you're doing and how it's going and how we can help. And so definitely don't want to forget about expansion, relocation, and transferability. That is also key to a business's survivability. And if revenues don't stabilize with these added uses, then perhaps we should consider adjusting the city's excise tax to maximize our revenues. If our revenues are falling, and we can increase revenues by adjusting that tax, by garnering a larger share of the market of sales, then I think that's something we should consider. But first, doing these added uses and seeing how that impacts because that is an unknown, so seeing how that impacts our revenues first. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Malgapo.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, like in most nights, we heard from patients and their ongoing difficulty with the various conditions, and it's hard to imagine the loss of their ability to obtain their medication. So currently, we've heard reports of declining sales, reduced customer traffic. It's being experienced by all 11 MMDs. It started after the first of the year when neighboring cities began to authorize the sale of recreational marijuana. We knew it was coming, but we we weren't quite as ready and as prepared. So as a policy-making body, we need to decide if the continued loss of revenue is acceptable, and clearly it is not. And there's the added threat of rising CalPERS rates. The League of Cities have made it abundantly clear that rising pension costs are not sustainable and will have to be dealt with in the immediate future, like in the next 2, 3, 4 years. Any lost revenues will be a step in the wrong direction. And I'm happy and I appreciate all my colleagues that have already spoken who understands the urgency of the situation. We could be down to 5 or 6 dispensaries by the end of the year if we do nothing. I spoke with Attorney Donna Mooney when I came back from some time off to visit with family. And in our conversation, the way we were proceeding, we were looking at the fall of this year, and that would be awfully too late. Happy to hear tonight that with some hard work from our panel here, Joanna, City Attorney's Office, we could potentially have an emergency resolution in front of us by the 27th of February and going into effect the very next day for recreational sales. Even if it's just Chapter 7.100 in the beginning, just to have it in place and allow the MMDs to commence the sale. 7.200, the rest of the stuff can be dealt with as expeditiously as possible, but the most urgent thing is allowing the sale to begin or commence on the 28th. I echo many of the things said by Councilmember McConnell, our mayor, Councilmember DuCosta, Councilmember Verdera Liga. I think to do nothing and allow the demise of our 11 businesses would be irresponsible. With all due respect to the ad hoc committee, I know they're hard at work and I don't want to get in front of them. I belong to several ad hoc committees, but tonight is just no disrespect to my colleagues, but and the mayor has already stated his position. This just absolutely cannot wait. And so I would welcome a resolution authorizing the sale of recreational marijuana on the 27th of February. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I believe Councilmember Sunga.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to thank all the speakers for enlightening us on this subject. Everybody knows where I stand on this, but the council have approved 11 dispensaries before, and I honor that. So I'm concerned with the good neighbor policy that the mayor stated. I think all the 11 dispensaries that are licensed have to act like any other business as far as good neighbors are concerned, and not bother the residents around you. And that's very important to me. But over 6 months ago, I think Councilmember Magapo, Councilmember Pippin, and myself went to a seminar in Oakland. And at that time, the other cities are already doing what we're doing now. And they were right on January 1st, they started selling. I thought at the time we went to that seminar that we are going to get ready for January 1st, but it didn't happen. But I agree with one of the speakers, hey, let them sell by tomorrow. But unfortunately, that's not how it works. So I agree with an emergency ordinance. Hopefully we can do it as fast as we can. If that's the earliest we can give, like staff have stated, I'm okay with that.
I think it's important that when we recognize these 11 dispensaries as businesses, we have to treat them like one. We have to help them thrive. And our inaction up to this point is hurting them. And as a result, it also hurts the city in forms of taxes. So the earliest that we can let them sell recreational marijuana is good for me. And that's important. And that's important. But for question, the ordinance we're talking about is just for recreational marijuana, Joanna? Is that all we're talking about? We're not talking about the manufacturing and cultivation, right? Delivery.
I'm sorry, can you rephrase your question?
The emergency ordinance that we're talking about in February, it only covers recreational marijuana, or does it cover cultivation, delivery, and things like that also?
So the recommendation would be recreational retail and delivery. Manufacturing, cultivation, and distribution, as they exist medically in Title 16, the city's zoning code requires more steps to amend. Therefore, it takes a longer period of time.
So what's the time frame you think those will come in front of the council?
So by July is what we had been discussing, with the primary concern being that there is an initiative ballot measure that if the legalities, as we are in the process of litigating those, if it remains, it would likely be advised that there be a countermeasure that would need to be placed on the ballot by July.
Okay. But anyway, I support the ordinance, and I just want to thank the ad hoc committee for working so hard in this. I know it's not as timely as we want it to be, but they work there behind that. I think they work so hard for this to come to this stage at this point, so I thank them for it, and staff also. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll have it up and running by the end of February or before. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Vice Mayor Meissner.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you guys for fielding all these questions. I have a couple more. So as far as the folks that may not be correctly zoned for manufacturing and cultivation, because we have a new general plan, what would it take for somebody to get a variance? If you could just describe that process. Is there a possibility of is it possible to grandfather people in?
So we just adopted a new general plan 2040 in August. So what we can do is, first step is to take a look at the compatibility of the existing land uses with that general plan, see if our interim zoning can apply to it. And one of the foremost things that we have to respect is the adoption of that general plan and consistency with that general plan. And then we can come forward with recommendations.
Okay. And so as far as monitoring, does the city do any monitoring? Like go in and do check on sort of a sting right now on any of the dispensaries?
So, excuse me, the City Council did authorize HDL companies to start doing compliance checks and financial auditing, which is somewhat different when it comes to an actual sting. Unless it's an illegal dispensary that we're wishing to get some evidence for, there have not been any sting operations to the compliant dispensaries.
And I raised that, I think we've got sort of an emergency right now, and then we also have what's the future going to look like way into the future when we have things transferred and this becomes sort of a regular business. And I think we just don't want to lose sight of, we know everybody now, but eventually we won't, and so we want to make sure that everybody's operating legally. And I also want to just say, I think it's already been said that I'm hoping that the 11 dispensaries will self-regulate, and if you know that one of your partners is not necessarily getting along with the neighbors, maybe take him aside, her aside, and say, hey, because it's difficult. We get those phone calls, and people, I mean, I know it because I have had some really difficult neighbors just renting a house across the street from me, and it can really be horrible for your life, I know it's just one person. We're looking at one person, or maybe two people, or one dispensary, or and it's a small percentage, but this is why we have planning. This is why we're having these discussions, because we want to avoid these kinds of situations. And we can avoid those situations by having the right things in the right place. And otherwise, we might as well just let anybody go wherever they want. So I just want to put that out there. I know that people are really frustrated at the slowness of where we're going, but we do want to make sure that this works for everybody so that you guys don't get people upset with you and we don't get the phone calls and everybody's happy and operating together. So that's actually kind of where I'm coming from. So as far as people talk about, the morality of it, we all do know that marijuana is here. It's here, and it's been here for years before it was even legal. And so, I think it's great what Gascon is doing in San Francisco to get rid of all those crimes off of people's records for marijuana crimes that go way back. And but when it comes to planning, it's just a whole different animal. So we're just talking about where things should be. And we will probably have people that smoke too much and drive, just as we have people that drink too much and drive. And I actually almost died when I was hit by a drunk driver back when I was a teenager when I was on a motorcycle. And so it just happens. I don't want to discount people that have gone through painful situations that may have involved marijuana or drinking or whatever. And sometimes I think what happens is the two get combined, and that's really a disaster when people are using multiples. And so, and as far as enforcement, I think what's sort of missing from this conversation about enforcement is our police chief. And so, as far as cadets and whatnot, I'd like to hear what our police chief has to say about some of this stuff. And he might have some good recommendations for us that we can follow to sort of help the chafing that's going on in the community. Because we do have a challenging city with various crimes that have to be addressed, and it's always a triage. Given that, people have talked about good neighbor laws and that kind of thing, and that's actually what we're doing. That's what the ad hoc committee has been doing, creating ways to make good neighbors out of all this. And so it takes time. Unfortunately, this is such a weird situation. Normally, you come into a city, a business comes into a city, and the ordinances are there. And this is such an odd situation where the laws and the state laws are changing constantly. We just heard that manufacturing, there's some stuff that's going to happen on the ballot in June. So the ground is always shifting, and we're standing on that ground trying to create ordinances that are going to work for our city as well, and the businesses want to come in and open up. So it's an unfortunate situation. It's just sort of the way it is. So I just want to put that out there as well, because I know people are really frustrated, and we hear it. So as far as the temporary, so it sounds like this, if we do something temporarily, it's not binding because it's in Chapter 17. And so we can, because I do want to see what happens when we add recreational to the mix. And, how's that going to impact the neighborhoods, and how can we think of ways, and how can the dispensaries think of ways to reduce those impacts, like even making appointments or something. Because this is brand new territory that we've never been down before. So we all need to get out of crystal balls and figure out what it's going to look like. Try to control it so it's not too impactful. And I really do understand that enforcing deliveries, the ones that are illegal, is difficult. So I like the idea of having a proof of license, and I do think that our local our dispensary should be allowed to deliver. So just to help cut out that other business. And, you know, I think doing that in February and then seeing what it looks like with the caveat that things are going to continue to change, unfortunately, or it's just the way it is. So I had one more thing I wanted to say. Oh, so, you know, I did get a text that there was a picture of weed maps, and those are the illegal dispensaries that are in the city right now. I think given all of, if anybody has an address, that they could send Ms. Mooney an email with a specific address of a specific dispensary that's specifically selling illegal marijuana, because it's you could end up chasing your tail, and people are really busy. So if you know of somebody that's illegal, please tell the city. Don't tag me on Facebook, because I can't chase that down. You know, I think that's really frustrating. I see that and like, why aren't you telling the city with an address so that we can go after it? So that's my recommendation, and I hope you all heed to it. So thank you.
Thank you. Before I call on Councilmember DuCosta, just a couple real quick things. Councilmember DuCosta, I believe it was you that mentioned this. So, and I didn't quite get the answer. So if we have an existing business that can't manufacture or can't cultivate at a given site, I would encourage us to look at allowing that business to have a secondary site so that they could do that specific, those two specific things.
We can certainly take a look at that and then come back with a recommendation. I believe that's currently allowed in our in the codes that in the ordinances that we have adopted.
For medicinal. So the ordinances that were adopted by the City Council on December 12th allowed the 11 permitted dispensaries to do medicinal cultivation manufacturing within specific general plan designations that the City Council approved. So that's something that's currently allowed, and we do have some of our dispensaries submitting zoning verification letters to begin that process.
Okay. And we use the number 11. We always use the number 11 as the allowed amount of dispensaries. I keep getting asked by dispensaries, okay, we keep hearing rumors that you're going to let another 5, 8, 10 folks come to town and open up, and I want to let folks know right up front, the answer is no. There are 11 permitted dispensaries in Vallejo, and that's where we're at, 11 permitted dispensaries. I wanted to say that publicly. Ms. Hamid, you used the term custom manufacturing. Could you tell me what that means? I think it was in relation to when we were talking delivery, manufacturing, and cultivation. Afshan, while you're looking that up, let me continue with just a couple other things. Neighborhood impacts. Vice Mayor Meisner mentioned that. I, too, am concerned about neighborhood impacts. Amount of traffic. We're already hearing that, driveways are getting blocked and so on and so forth. The amount of pedestrian traffic. We've heard from some of the folks out here that they've turned away X number of people. Is that what we're going to have to anticipate? So I think that's something we're going to need to explore with the organizations. So the 11 of you that are out there right now, that's something we probably ought to talk about, how we're going to deal with lines outside your store, cars blocking, double parking, all those things. So these are things that we're going to have to start talking about. If it's going to impact our neighborhoods, then we're going to have some issues. I know some of you, like Jorge, your place, you've got a huge parking lot, so it isn't going to be an issue for you guys. Nope. Don't go there. But then there's some of you that don't have the parking. I'm thinking of one that's at right off Springs Road in Miller. U.S. Bloom, yeah. Relief. Yep, Relief. They don't have they don't even have a parking lot. Maurice, you're going to have some issues. So these are things we're going to need to start talking about, and we need to come to an agreement with it so that we're not going to impact the community. Afshan, did you find that?
Sure. So there are what we call use classifications.
Mm-hmm.
In that use classification, we have manufacturing, and it's broken down into 3 different components. So there's heavy industrial, there's general industrial, and then there's custom manufacturing. Heavy industrial refers more to radioactive materials, which would not apply to this. General industrial refers to processing, assembling, packaging, which could be closely aligned to this. And then there's custom manufacturing, more like small goods, arts and crafts, things of like a ceramic studio. That could possibly also apply if we're considering things such as oils or accessory items. So that could also apply. And these baked goods, yes, for example. So these various manufacturing use classifications would then need to be looked at under the land use.
Okay, and we can look at that on individual sites, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So we will be discussing that at our next ad hoc meeting. Thank you. Councilmember DaCosta.
Thank you, Mayor Sampayan. So my question is what my statement was earlier regarding the emergency ordinance was that I do want to see manufacturing and cultivation in the emergency ordinance allowed for the 11 in the zones, the business, limited residential, light industrial, heavy industrial. But I'm wondering in trying to capitalize on the time frames, if we can do 2 ordinances so that we do the recreational and the delivery to the existing 11, although I still want to keep it short term, whatever that length of time is, so that the ones that are not in those 3 zones can move the recreational operation to those zones along with cultivation and manufacturing, and then have a separate ordinance for the manufacturing and cultivation of recreational in the zones that's already approved. So basically just taking the ordinance we did in December and for those 2 uses, adding recreational.
Let me see if I can sort through this. What we did in December, and we had 2 ordinances addressing Chapter 7, which is about conduct. We had Title 16 ordinance, which is the zoning, which went through the Planning Commission and then came to you. So that zoning ordinance allowed for cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution in 3 zones: the intensive use limited, and PDI. If I'm hearing you correctly, you're wondering if there's a way to fit in retail along with cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution in those 3 zones. Is that about right on an emergency basis? You want to speak to that?
So in anticipation of this question, I did take a quick look at the possibility of allowing retail where we currently have manufacturing, cultivation, and distribution. And it currently would be allowed. However, I do want to take a close look at it before we bring it back. So.
It's currently allowed, recreational?
Well, if we were to apply retail to those specific cultivation, distribution, and manufacturing areas as well.
Okay, so when you say retail, I just think of shop front sales. You're meaning adult use, the recreational.
Correct.
And so if we allowed retail to those three zones, it could be retail, it could be recreational across all uses.
Well, we would need to look at and see if we need to create a specific retail just for marijuana.
Recreational marijuana.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So can we do that? Like, what's the time frame on that?
So it would need to go through the Planning Commission, and that's something that would take a longer process.
Okay, so could we do both of those things where we're doing the Planning Commission process for the retail on all of those categories, and an emergency ordinance that does the recreational retail and delivery by the end of February, or whatever that date was, February, whatever.
Yes, what I'm hearing being teed up is for the 27th, you would be allowing recreational retail and delivery for the 11 incumbents where they're at. And then meanwhile, we'd also be working on an ordinance that would come through the Planning Commission for the zoning of the retail, both medical and recreational, that would come back later in the year for the allowable use in those whatever zoning districts are chosen,
Those
likely the
zones.
three.
Yeah. And so could we do because I heard a date earlier if we did the emergency ordinance and doing all of them, and it had to go through the planning, but still it was not that far out. It was a couple months further out, I thought.
You heard
April.
Yeah, that's
July.
what I thought I heard.
You heard July for the zoning code amendments by July. So based on the timeline that we went off of for the most recent amendments that came before the council December 12th, that direction came during actually the September 12th, I believe, meeting. So it did take 3 months' time, and that's why the by July time frame. It's possible one of the meetings in June, but just to give enough time, by July is.
Yeah. Mr. Nyath, did you have comments, sir?
I do, Mr. Mayor and members of council, and thank the staff for working hard on this item. I wanted to say how much I appreciate the direction given by City Council tonight. I haven't been here that long, but I've watched meetings and seen the conversation going, and I see we want to do this, we really want to do this. The community's giving great input into this. So tonight I think you gave very clear direction to us to move on emergency ordinance. And then what you're seeing in front of what we're all seeing here when it comes to the planning conversation is that you have a general planned use, and some of these places don't exist in those. And so we have to figure out the legal mechanism by which we can do it on a temporary basis, and then we don't want to fix a situation where people invest in facilities that in 2 years are not compatible with whatever zone they're in at the time. So I see my staff coming up with dates and they're having conferences. I would like to just say is I think we've pretty much got what you want to do and how you want to do that. I think I'd rather go back and later this week or next week just give you a whole schedule. I think that's good for the community. That's good for council. I just don't want to be making promises out here that we're just not quite sure of. And I guess I would say I don't know that you're quite sure of the dates. And I want to be able to support you 100% and give them the support they need to get it done. So we'll move very quickly. You've been very clear tonight that we get that emergency ordinance. We have something to bring you on the 27th. You know, to the community, I've watched this, I think, and talking about the planning department, the issues, they're short a couple of people, but you just have to understand we as council elected officials, city managers, because we get the calls too, is we have to be concerned about compatibility wherever you are with the current zones. I heard somebody at the last meeting say they were lined up outside of Oakland. Well, if you're the neighbor or 2 doors down and you're lined up in front of your home, that's going to hurt the property values of that home and so forth. So we just want to do that right, and so does this council. So we'll move on the emergency side. I really appreciate the city attorney's input and all of your input, but we'll get you something on that land use. There might be, you know, terms that we permit this, but I think you've given us tremendous input tonight and direction. I think that's, from talking to staff, that's what we wanted tonight, and I think you went beyond, actually. You just like, go. And so that's appreciated. And I just want to give you something here in another 10 days for the longer range land use compatibility issues, planning commission, those types of things. But the other part of getting emergency ordinance, we go right away. So I just wanted to share that with you because I know they've worked hard on it, but you've given us clear direction, in my opinion. And then a few things that we still might need when we bring back, you'll be able to discuss, or at the ad hoc committee level, and we'll finish those. So I think you're well on your way to getting this issue resolved, I think, once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember DuCosta.
Thank you, Mayor Sampine, and I definitely appreciate that, Mr. Nyhoff. I appreciate you taking the time to go back and make sure that the timeframes are, done right and capacity is there. And but I just want to. I was, diving into the. Stupid puns, not pun intended, diving into the weeds on the details just because I think it would be easier. I was trying to make it easier. So we already allow manufacturing and cultivation for, the same plant, the same product, but it just has a code medicinal. And I want to allow our businesses, because the medicinal plant can't then be manufactured for a recreational product. So they have to stay streamlined on the product type. And so I just want to make sure that we are giving our businesses the best opportunity to remain viable and successful. And so the details I was driving into was because we are already allowing it in these 3 zones, and just changing the code on the product, I think, I was trying to make it simple. So, but I appreciate what you're saying. I just wanted to really pound on that point. So thank you.
Thank you.
And just as a reminder, the good news is the state is allowing until July cross supplies, medicinal and adult use. So those don't have to be separated until July. I know that I see that Councilmember Verder-Liga has more comments to make. I wanted to make sure to address one thing before we finish the conversation. It's an important point. It has to do with moving and distances. I heard some discussion earlier about how many have had to move and moving multiple times. I wanted to clarify, only 3 of our 11 have had to move. And the reason they had to move is they were too close to a school. Now, from there, I also want to point out that when we talk about shifting sands and whatnot, you hit that right on the head. What we saw was when we first came to you, the very first time, we talked about 600 feet or 1,000, and council wanted 1,000. Then we saw the state law changed, and we saw that Prop 64 had medicinal separate from adult use. You couldn't have them on the same premises. Then we saw the concern about, well, if that's going to happen, we need to reduce it to 600 feet or there won't be enough spaces in the city of Vallejo to accommodate all these folks. Then we saw in September SB 94 or SB 133 change that so you could have both on the same site. So we are pedaling as fast as we can to deal with all this. Where I'm getting at is, do you want 600 feet or 1,000 feet? And let me tell you, our understanding up here, the 3 of us, is if you go with 1,000 feet, 3 of the dispensaries absolutely would have to move versus the 600 feet. What's that?
That's going to promote some real difficulty, and I think that's something we as a council are going to need to discuss. Yeah, okay. As far as I'm concerned, we agreed on the 600 feet, and that's where we were the last time we talked about distances. So I'm prepared to say, let's just leave it at 600 feet. And I'm seeing a nod. No, we're not going to open any new ones.
leave it as we have it now, and those 3 at 600, I'm okay with that.
I'm seeing some nods here.
Yeah.
So what are y'all thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes.
But those that are within 1,000 feet should stay at 1,000. If they want to move somewhere in the future, they should stay at 1,000.
Right. And that's something we as an ad hoc committee will probably be discussing tomorrow. Let's see, who's next on the list here? Councilmember Verdura-Liga?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. What a night. But this is a long time coming. So a couple more comments. We know that there are several cities that already do adult use recreational marijuana. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's language that's already out there, and I've mentioned this before. Rather than you rewriting whatever or putting new language, there's already existing language out there. Just my suggestion. I'm not telling you how to do your job, but you know what to do. So for Tier 1, I'm still in support of making it the Tier 1 goal, and we have a goal-setting session coming up in March. I will be putting it up as a Tier 1 goal in support of what Councilmember McConnell mentioned. So that's down the line in March, because I think we really need to take care of this in the next 6 months, meaning everything done, everything, if we can. I think we can. If we make it a Tier 1 goal, and we can take care of this whole ordinance sooner than later. Okay, and then my other comment is down the line, I know that we are taxing at 10%. Down the line, we need to be competitive with the other cities. I know that some cities tax higher on adult use and lower on medical cannabis, because I want both products to be available to folks. So that's something down the line we need to look at. To be competitive, we need the revenue, and also there's still value in medical cannabis. There's still certain products that should be exclusively for medical use. So that's just down the line. And then taxes, and I just want to crack down on those 14 illegal in this stores, dispensaries, whatever you call it. There's unanimous.
Yeah, I would like to comment on that, because it does pain me to keep hearing this phrase,
really
14. I'm, let me say, highly skeptical, and I am on the verge of saying there's no way there's 14 illegal dispensaries in town.
Hope there's not.
I'll tell you this, I monitor Weed Maps, so if somebody is texting you something from Weed Maps, what I'm suggesting is it's probably a list of delivery companies, not storefronts.
But they're operating out of
Morgan, we get it. We'll talk about it. Let her finish, please. Don't interrupt the meeting. Thank you, Madam City Attorney.
So I suspect they are deliveries and not storefronts, which is, as we've talked about, a different ball game to address, and that allowing deliveries by our incumbents is one policy way of addressing it, in addition to the enforcement on those. Also, I know there's various rumors that come along. We often get misinformation. It was difficult hearing, why have you let the dispensary at 308 Tennessee operate so long? Well, we haven't. As you know, we started litigation against them 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. The question should have been better directed at the court, which denied our initial request for an injunction, but then we prevailed on the appeal and finally got the order, which we served just last month. So we take it very seriously, and we spend a lot of time and effort on it, on enforcement.
And thank you for the record. I know that you do, and I really appreciate your efforts, your whole team, all the work that you've done, and moving this to, faster than light speed. So thank you. Looking forward to the emergency ordinance on February 27. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you. A request and then one observational comment. When you return to us on February 27th, will you please present us with a list of each of the 11 dispensaries and the current zoning, general plan classification that they have for each of those 11 locations. Then on the directional, I heard some observations from my colleagues that, and staff too, that if they didn't meet the general plan classification, then they could find have a secondary location. I want to very clearly say that I am not necessarily in support of that as a first priority. My first priority is that we give consideration to keeping each one of the 11 dispensaries in their present location, and to the extent that it is physically possible, that they be permitted to engage in cultivation, distribution, research, and manufacturing. I don't wish to burden them with yet another move or even a second move if we can avoid that. So if you find upon review of the 11 dispensaries that they are presently in a general plan classification that would prevent that from occurring, such as lineal commercial, then I would like your recommendations as to how to amend the general plan in order to permit them to accomplish the result of staying in that location and engaging in those 4 additional areas.
Okay, seeing no other lights, I think we've given you some homework. Mr. Nyoff, I want to thank you for your comments. To the point, very much appreciated. Yes, we have given staff direction tonight, and it's very clear where we need to go. I'm very much appreciative to our businesses that are hanging in there with us, that are still working with us, that are still doing business. So thank you very much to all of you. Again, Mr. Nyoff, thank you for your comments. They're very much appreciated. Staff, thank you very much for your patience with us. Ms. Mooney, wow, I got a smile out of you. That's pretty good. Yeah, I just go back to the days when we first started all this, and we had, I don't know how many renditions and how many readings of 7.1. I just can't believe it. But okay, that said, Mr. Nyoff, did you have a comment you wanted to make, sir?
You did so well tonight. Just appreciate that. And I would want to say that I think, we expect additional revenues from here. And I heard neighbors concerned. I heard current retailers concerned about. So I do think that I'll be talking to the chief and the staff about having somebody dedicated to that, because we need it for everybody concerned here, so that all parties feel like we're very responsive. I think it has been, but we're in a whole new world. I think we've said that. And so we're going to see impacts to areas where we just want to be very responsive. So we'll take a look at that too and talk to the chief, as I think you mentioned earlier, one of the council members, Councilmember DaCosta, just to make sure we're responsive. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, thank you very much, Council, for coming together on this one tonight. This was really a good exercise for all of us. We all came together, we worked hard, we communicated, and we got it done. So, that said, we stand in adjournment. Good night.